So, when I was a child, my mum brought us 2 Oddstars. And if you don't know what an Oddstar is, they later got brought out and became part of the Foxtel family. But anyways, my parents have one in the lounge room, and there's one in me and my older sister's room. I've got some childhood trauma from that Oddstar, no thanks to my older sister. But anyway, I would use the Oddstar to watch a few animated TV shows that I still enjoy to this day. Other than being a Cartoon Network show that is pretty obscure, and I don't know if you guys heard of it, it's called the Powerpuff Girls. Powerpuff Girls was an animated TV show about 3 little girls who live in a city called Townsville. And here's the thing, these are not ordinary little girls. They actually have superpowers. And how they got those superpowers was the fact that their father, the professor, was trying to create the perfect little girls with the ingredients, sugar, spice, and everything nice. But he was pushed by Mojo Jojo, and he accidentally added an extra ingredient to the concoction. Chemical X. Yeah, so the Powerpuff Girls are born, and they fight crime as well as the forces of evil. 3 girls in the group are Blossom, who is the leader, and Bubbles and Buttercup, who are both her sisters that fight alongside her. Now, the girls never kill their enemies or anyone, well, except monsters. But what if I told you there was a fanfiction where the girls did murder their enemies and kill innocent people too? Well, except Bubbles, but I'll talk about her later. If you haven't tell by the thumbnail or the title of the video, I'll be reviewing and talking about a fanfiction called Power Snuff, which is a story created by Reitanna Seishin. Yes, that Reitanna Seishin. This is a story that you guys probably never heard of, or just simply forgotten it even existed. Like, it's probably just me, but I rarely see anyone talk about it. And there's always people talking about muffins. But anyhow, let me talk about what the story is about. Also, if you do want to check out Power Stuff, then I highly suggest you skip this video because I'll get into spoiler territory. The story begins with us being introduced to the girls who are just hanging out in their bedroom. We then get a phone call from the mayor who lets them know that Mojo Jojo have built a huge missile launcher and he is planning on blowing up the town with it. So the girls went to his lair to fight Mojo Jojo. They stop him, but he had a backup plan, which was a second missile and a cannon that he was planning to use to destroy the Powerpuff Girls. But Bubbles and Buttercup were able to stop his second plan, and while Mojo Jojo was trying to get to a button, presumably to launch another missile or something, and so Blossom launched herself at him in an attempt to stop Mojo, and she ends up slicing him in half with blades that just randomly appear out of her arms like as if she is Wolverine or something. Obviously, since these are 3 little girls who are the age of kindergarten children, so I'm assuming they're 5 years old I guess, are horrified at what had just happened. Bubbles is upset, Buttercup is horrified, and Blossom is upset too. Both Bubbles and Buttercup want to alert the mayor about what has happened, and Blossom, who is supposed to be the more reasonable and smart one, they want to, which, to be fair, I can kind of understand since she did murder someone, and her being a kindergarten kid, this is way too much for her mind to handle, and since she is still in shock from what she had just done and witnessed, I don't think she can think logically at this point. And in one scene, Buttercup suddenly starts to yell at her for getting new powers, which I know this is a reference to that one episode where Blossom gets ice breath, and so Buttercup and Bubbles end up being jealous at her for it, but it just feels out of place, especially in this iteration of the story. Anyways, Blossom ends up telling Buttercup to help her throw Mojo's corpse into a volcano, which they ended up doing. And then Buttercup convinces her that she should at least tell the professor about her new ability. The girls then end up having a bath in Mojo Jojo's lair while their clothes get washed. Of course, Buttercup and Blossom staying to come out all the way, so they decide to just claim that their clothes got dirty in the fight. They arrive back at their house where the professor greets them and offers to clean their dress. While the girls went upstairs to get changed before going back downstairs to watch cartoons to try and forget about what they had just witnessed. The professor realized that their dresses weren't covered in dirt, but blood. After bringing it down to the lab to take a look at it, he confronts the girls, which Blossom doesn't come clean to him, nor does Buttercup. But Bubbles ends up telling him Blossom and her sister, who panicked when she saw the horrified expression on the professor's face. She ended up shoving him to the ground, and when Professor Utonium made a run for it so he could call for help, reasonably so because his daughter has just murdered someone and is possibly trying to murder him, Blossom ends up, and I kid you not, sliced the professor's leg off below the knee. Holy fuck. I remember first reading that, or technically hearing it because I was listening it to Reitanna's narration on her channel long ago. I was absolutely in shock, but it gets worse and cruel. Buttercup yells and slaps Blossom for doing that to their dad, and then went to try and help him, only for her to accidentally decapitate the professor because Buttercup ended up getting axes coming out of her arms just as she went to hug her father, which, don't worry, their powers do get sort of explained in the last chapter of power stuff, and don't worry, it's stupid. Bubbles starts screaming about how she is next to get this power, and Buttercup blames Blossom for the death of the professor because it wouldn't have happened if she had just told the mayor what had happened, as well as explained to the professor about how she had gotten the blades too. Then Buttercup starts referencing the backstory on how her and her sisters got their powers, which, yeah, just a warning, you'll be seeing a lot of references of the past Powerpuff Girls episodes in this fanfic, which can feel distracting in some cases, and sometimes it can enter the story naturally, like the rowdy rough boys telling the girls that they were in Citiesville. Yes, those three also appear in the story, but I'll bring them up later. Buttercup wants to tell the mayor what had happened, and this is where Blossom's manipulation starts to slowly appear. So Blossom asks Buttercup if she loves her, which I do hope is family love and not incest, but I can't tell since I'm reading a story written by Reitanna Seishin, and she is known for writing incest crap. But safe to say it's family love. So Buttercup says that she does, and Blossom simply tells her to just do what she says before telling the girls that they'll need to destroy the professor's body. But Bubbles refuses and wants to bury him instead, saying it would be wrong to not give their father a proper burial. Like, where's that same attitude with Mojo Jojo, Bubbles? I get that he's evil and all, but he's also technically was the one who helped create you three and given you all superpowers. So the two girls end up taking the professor's corpse to the lab so they could burn his body with their heat vision. Bubbles was left behind by herself, and she was given the task of cleaning the crime scene, which she couldn't do it, and she broke down crying again, and she ends up getting yelled at by Blossom. After a while, they end up going to bed, which I'm surprised they could even sleep after what had just happened today. And then him appears, and his role in the story is just pointless if you ask me. Basically, he acts as the girl's devil on their shoulder, just as trying to manipulate them into murdering people and past foes. The only Powerpuff he wasn't able to manipulate and convince her to use her new power was Bubbles, but I'll get to her later. And not gonna lie, when I first listened to this story, I thought that him was behind it all, and him claiming that it wasn't him is a lie, and the fact that he tells Blossom that it could possibly be because she and her sister's getting older. But it was later revealed that it's definitely not him, which is honestly disappointing, and it just felt like a red herring right there. But he was successful in breaking Blossom and convincing her that if you're the leader, then they do what you say, to the point that she forces her sisters to go to kindergarten with her. Despite Blossom obviously staying up all night and drinking coffee, but she doesn't stay in school for long, and she asks her teacher if she could go home, and instead of her teacher calling her father to let him know what is going on and to come pick her up, she just lets Blossom leave. Like, yeah, I know she has superpowers and all, but it just feels off to me, but it could also just be me who haven't watched Powerpuff Girls for ages. So Blossom leaves and ends up going to the forest to reflect on what had happened. Her mind then snaps and she ends up murdering Fuzzy Lumpkins unprovoked. I'm not kidding, she just literally entered his home and just murders him right there, which just feels forced. It would make a lot of sense if, let's say, a rabbit was past her, and so she randomly cuts it in half, or I don't know, the birds that squawk at Blossom before it ends up being sliced by her. So when Bubbles and Buttercup return home, they see her hair and arms covered in blood, and she held Fuzzy's antenna in her hand. So Buttercup and Bubbles end up leaving the room in horror, and for whatever reason, they ended up flying to his cabin and went inside, which there are literally hints that Blossom murdered him, and she even says this, so I have no idea why they decide to go to his cabin. My only guess is so they could check if he is actually dead. So Buttercup has enough of Blossom's shit, so she takes Bubbles to the mayor so they could tell him and Miss Bella what had happened to Mojo Jojo, the professor, and Fuzzy Lumpkins. However, if you think this is where the story ends, you are wrong, because what happens next is Blossom somehow finds out where her sisters were, and so she ends up slaughtering a bunch of random people, including the mayor's guards and employees. Miss Bellum tries to calm the situation down, but unfortunately it did not work well, considering that Blossom ends up killing her. And then she manipulates Buttercup into murdering the mayor, and then they end up hiding in Mojo's lair since the police are after them for obvious reasons. Then Buttercup was visited by him, who manipulates her into helping Blossom, and in the exact same chapter she ends up murdering King Morbucks as a mercy killing because Blossom randomly chose to kill his daughter. Later on in the chapter, the Rowdy Rough Boys went to visit Mojo Jojo, only to find the girls, and they haven't known what had happened the past few weeks to the girls because they were in Citiesville, which you wouldn't have think there would be a global news story about what happened in Townsville, and the fact that the Powerpuff Girls are bad. So the Rowdy Rough Boys ended up unintentionally triggering Blossom, who brought her blades out ready to attack them. Buttercup tries to get Blossom not to do it. Meanwhile, Bubbles tells the boys to run. Blossom ends up stabbing Brick in the chest, and Boomer tries to attack Blossom, while Buttercup tries to restrain her. Upset at the fact that she supposedly killed his brother, but it is revealed by Butch that Brick is still breathing. So Blossom tries to attack Brick again, only for Buttercup to tackle her sister to the floor and punch her in the face. Then, of course, Blossom does her manipulation tactic again. You know, her asking Buttercup if she loves her or not, which sadly she gave in to the tactic, and she stands with Blossom ready to attack the three boys. But that was until the police arrive, assuming that they figure out that the girls were going to be hiding in Mojo's lair. Oh, and Buttercup wasn't able to stop her attack in time and ended up cutting Butch's leg off. So the boys were able to escape, and so did the girls, after Buttercup and Blossom ended up slaughtering a bunch of police officers, which does this town not have a safety measure just in case this sort of thing happens? I'm sorry for pausing here, but I find it hard to believe that this town did not create a safety measure just in case any of the Powerpuff Girls go rogue. I know this is just a story, but this fucking annoys me. Like later in the story, Blossom mentions Antidote X, and then later her sisters use it to get rid of their powers, which is a bit later if you ask me, and keep in mind, Antidote X is created by a professor, which you wouldn't think he had told the mayor and police about it, and maybe even give them Antidote X, just in case this thing ever happens. It's kind of like how Batman mentions that he has kryptonite, just in case Superman ever goes rouge. But the last time I ever heard him mention that was in a Batman Lego film. But anyways, they ended up back in the forest where Fuzzy used to live, and the same solid dance happens. Buttercup yells at Blossom for murdering people, and making her kill people too. Blossom then guilts her by playing the victim, and then Bubbles ends up snapping at Buttercup for trying to convince her that everything is going to be okay. But Bubbles isn't buying that BS sense, you know. Then Blossom flies off and the sisters follow her to the Gangrene Gang's hideout, which Buttercup ends up helping Blossom murder almost all of the members of the Gangrene Gang. gang, except for Ace and Snake, who are able to escape thanks to Bubbles. Bubbles ends up stepping outside, and she listens to the argument that her sisters were having. And the reason Blossom shows to murder some of the members of the gang-leading gang randomly is because they needed a place to hide. But at the same time, she doesn't care that Ace and Snake had escaped, because that's how far gone she is. She can no longer think logically. Then a squirrel approached Bubbles and she pets it. And here's the sad and cruel part. The squirrel shrieks in pain and runs off with his shoulders bleeding, because Bubbles, unfortunately, had gotten her new powers, which were metal spikes. She ends up showing her powers to her sisters, and that's when Blossom finally realized that there is in fact a way to stop their powers. Antidote X. Like, wow. But instead of heading straight to their house, they ended up sleeping in a cardboard box in a nearby dump. And then him visits Bubbles, and TLDR, he isn't able to manipulate her, and Bubbles says she doesn't have the urge to kill or to use her new weapons. Put a pin on the urge to kill part. So the next day, they ended up flying back to their house and used the Antidote X, which got rid of their powers. Then they disguised themselves as boys in order to sneak out of town. Oh, I forgot to mention that the girls decided to leave town so they could start over. Okay, so 3 kindergarteners without powers, so they are basically regular children, was able to leave town by sneaking on a cargo train. Okay then. Anyways, they ended up on the edge of a cliff of their new town they're going to be living in to start their new life. Blossom starts talking about how things will change now and they can start all over. Then Bubbles randomly push Blossom off of the cliff to her death. And remember, since they all taken the Antidote X, Blossom can't fly and therefore couldn't rescue herself from the fall. And so she ends up dying on impact. So, remember when Bubbles said she doesn't have an urge to kill anyone? Apparently she meant she doesn't have an urge to kill anyone who isn't Blossom. Bubbles then shows her plush octopus opting down the cliff too, which I'm guessing that's supposed to represent the fact that Bubbles had lost her innocence, or that she is throwing a part of self away. She ends up leaving Buttercup behind, and then the fanfic basically shows an epilogue of each of the sisters, except for Blossom, because, well, do I need to say why? We first see Buttercup's epilogue, which is her basically starting her new life in the new town. She ends up staying at the orphanage. She changed her name to Sarah after Miss Bellum. She ends up developing insomnia, then laid up being adopted by a man named Mr. Peters. Then it shows her as a teenager who plays songs on her guitar for people out in town without asking for any money. And that's about it for her. Nothing really important to note except the fact that she never mentions the past to Mr. Peters, which I couldn't blame her, and honestly I'm surprised that Buttercup was found out, because again, wouldn't there be a news report about what happened in Townsville? And lastly, wouldn't people be suspicious with Buttercup? Correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't think there was any other human character in the show that has no nose. Only the Powerpuff Girls, the Rowdy Rough Boys, and I'm guessing Buddy too. And I didn't bring Bliss up because she does not exist in the 2000s PPC series. Then we finally get to Bubbles' epilogue, which is her returning to Townsville, turning herself in. She ends up telling the entire court what had happened, and then she went mute. No, really, she went mute, because her mind had finally shut down, and the court found her not guilty by reason of insanity, and she was taken to the Children's Hospital for kids with mental disabilities. Later on, she was put in a boarding school and said she can't speak. They given her a chalkboard that she wears around her neck. I'm pretty sure that's not how it works, depending on the year this series is set in. Bubbles should have gotten a AAC device. An AAC device is a device made to help children or adults who can't talk due to their disability, or something to speak. I can only assume that Reitanna didn't know those exist, or think they did not exist in the 2000s, which there is a version of the AAC device that I remember seeing in my old class, but it was on paper, but the paper is protected by this plastic thing. I forgot what it's called. Basically, the last part of the fanfic shows Bubbles visiting Ace and Snake, which by the way Snake is called Samson now, and they no longer do crime after what had just happened. She also reunites with the Rowdy Rough Boys, who showed that they have good powers now that came from doing good selfless things. Boomer has healing powers, where Boomer can heal his own wounds, which he showed this to Bubbles by cutting his own wrists in front of her without warning. Brick has the ability to shoot into people's emotions, which includes blostings, and finally Bush basically has the same power as Boomer, except for the fact that his acts like a painkiller. And then Brick basically explains why the girls got bad powers and the boys got good powers. It's because the girls were good and the boys were bad. No, not kidding, that is the actual reason, and it's probably the worst reasoning I ever heard, and it doesn't make sense, but that's just me. Then the next day, Bubbles go to visit Bullet. I forgot to mention that Bullet's in the story too, kind of. So she talks, or more accurately shores, to one of the animals, asking them about Bullet. And they basically said that Bullet ended up getting bad powers, that being shagging races coming out of her ankles and wrists. And her mind broke quickly because squirrels' brains are smaller than child's brains, according to Reitanna. And TLDR, she ends up going on a killing rampage until she was shredded to death by a badger. Honestly, I don't like how this part about Bullet getting powers was just added into the end of the story. It just feels like it was added as a, oh, by the way, this happened thing. And it would work a lot better if it shows the girls visiting Bullet and they see Bullet going insane, so Bubbles trying to help, but it doesn't go well, so it's her who is forced to kill Bullet. That would have been more impactful rather than just, oh, by the way, she's dead. And then the story ends with Bubbles sitting in the bedroom of her old childhood home. Now, what is my thoughts on this fanfic? In conclusion, I do really want to say that this is the most greatest thing I ever read, but I can't really see myself saying that. Not just because it's written by Reitanna Seishin, who is the most controversial fanfic writer in my opinion, but because it's just good, not great. I do not like how drag out Bubbles' epilogue is, and I do not like the many pointless gore scenes, just as the one with Blossom ends up randomly killing Fuzzy for some reason. And the fact that she and her sister killed most of the Gangrene Gang's members. And then there's the scenes featuring him who doesn't really do jack shit in the series other than just trying to manipulate the girls into killing. And then we have the part where she just throws Bullet in as a, hey, by the way, rather than just introduce Bullet into the story organically. But overall, I did quite enjoy the story since it's a lot better than Muffins, but that's because this story didn't try to continue in multiple parts or side stories. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed my review, and of course, if you can support me on my social medias, and most importantly, my Ko-Fi account. I hope I see you guys again soon in my next video. Goodbye!